War. It's humanity's oldest, loudest, and most exhausting bad habit. We fight over land. We fight over money. We fight over ideas. Sometimes we even fight over nothing at all. But once, just once, we nearly went to war over a pig. No, really, this is the story of the Pig War, a conflict between the United States and the British Empire. There were soldiers, there were ships, there were loaded rifles, but not a single person died. Only one pig. And yet, it nearly changed history. Chapter 1. A world on edge. To understand how a pig could almost cause a war, we have to go back, way back. The year is 1859. The world is changing rapidly. Steamships power across oceans. Telegraph wires stretch across continents. Empires are flexing. Nations are expanding. And two of those nations, the British Empire and the United States, are, well, not exactly best friends. Britain was the reigning global superpower. They ruled India, Canada, Australia, huge parts of Africa, and way too many islands to count. The United States, meanwhile, was the loud new kid on the block, just 83 years old and already very ambitious. The country was growing westward at an alarming pace, fueled by an idea called manifest destiny. It meant Americans believed it was their divine right to take over the entire continent. So here we have one enormous empire and one enormous appetite. Guess what happens when both think they own the same patch of land? Chapter 2. The island nobody could share between what is now Washington State and Vancouver Island. There's a cluster of rocky, forested islands. These are the San Juan Islands. Quiet, misty, full of deer, pine trees, and pigs. But in the 1850s, they were valuable, not for what they had, but for where they were. Control the San Juans, and you control shipping routes into the Puget Sound. You also get a perfect military outpost and bragging rights. So of course, both Britain and America claimed them. And of course, neither wanted to back down. Chapter 3. The treaty that made it worse. Back in 1846, both sides tried to solve the problem peacefully. They signed something called the Oregon Treaty. It said the border would run along the 49th parallel to the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver Island. Sounds clear, right? Except there were two channels, Haro Strait and Rosario Strait. The British liked Rosario, which gave them the islands. The Americans liked Haro, which gave them the islands. So both sides just started living there. Imagine a group project where both people insist they're the leader. Now add military bases and muskets. Chapter 4. Two flags, one island, and one very annoying pig. Fast forward to 1859. San Juan Island is a weird little standoff. British and American settlers live there uneasily, technically neighbors, but also not technically legal residents, depending on who you ask. Enter the pig. This pig was owned by a British man named Charles Griffin, who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. Griffin let his pig roam freely, because that's what British pigs do, apparently. One day, the pig wandered into the garden of Lyman Cutlar, an American farmer, and ate his potatoes. This wasn't the first time. Cutlar had warned Griffin before, so this time. And that's when the war almost started. Chapter 5. A pig, a rifle, and a very expensive apology. Griffin was furious. He demanded $100 in compensation. That's over $3,000 today. For one pig. Cutlar offered $10, which Griffin rejected, which Cutlar refused to change, which made both sides run to their governments, which led to guns. Soon, American settlers called in the U.S. Army for protection. In response, the British sent warships. Two empires, two armies, two flags, all because of one pig. Chapter 6. Enter the American Army. After the pig incident, things escalated fast. The American settlers were worried. Would the British arrest Cutlar? Kick out the Americans? Seize the land? So they called in the big guns. Enter Captain George Edward Pickett. Pickett had charisma, ambition, and absolutely zero chill. He sailed over from nearby Fort Bellingham with 66 American soldiers and set up camp on the island. He claimed the entire thing for the United States, and he dared the British to stop him. Pickett cartoon quote, "We will make a Bunker Hill of it." Older words for a man defending potatoes. Chapter 7. The British Navy arrives and hesitates. The British, of course, were not amused. Governor James Douglas, watching from Vancouver Island, was ready to respond. So he sent 3 Royal Navy warships carrying over 2,000 men to restore order. Yes, 2,000 British troops versus 66 Americans. Over one pig. But here's the twist. The British didn't open fire. Why? Because their admiral, Robert Baines, wasn't a hothead. When he arrived, he saw what was happening and said something along the lines of, "I will not involve 2 great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig." So instead of fighting, the 2 sides talked. Chapter 8. The coldest Cold War thus began one of history's weirdest standoffs. For 12 years, both countries jointly occupied San Juan Island. They even divided it in half, American camp and the South British camp in the north, each with its own barracks, flags, commanders, and social calendars. There were no battles. Instead, dances, theater performances, holiday dinners, and one very confusing baseball game where no one could agree on the rules. The 2 sides became weirdly friendly. Soldiers would borrow each other's newspapers, trade butter for bacon, even rescue each other's livestock. The war had become a neighborhood block party with uniforms. Chapter 9. Meanwhile, in distant capitals. Back in Washington and London, officials were confused and annoyed. The situation was not violent, not resolved, and not going away. Both sides knew war would be ridiculous. But neither wanted to look weak. So they did what powerful nations do when stuck. They stalled. Until finally, in 1871, the US and Britain agreed, let's ask someone else to decide. They turned to Germany. Yes, Germany. Chapter 10. Kaiser Wilhelm I saves the day. In the pig's legacy, they asked Kaiser Wilhelm I, the leader of the newly united German Empire, to arbitrate. After reviewing maps, documents, and probably some potato recipes, he ruled in America's favor. The San Juan Islands were officially U.S. territory, and the British gracefully left. Chapter 11. Peace, potatoes, and the absurdity of it all. Today, the San Juan Islands are quiet again. You can still visit American camp and British camp, now preserved as national parks. You can walk the border where soldiers once stood with loaded rifles and politely said, "After you." And somewhere in the grass, you might hear the ghostly ike of history's most accidental war hero, a pig who changed the map. Chapter 12. The 2 men who could have started a war. But didn't history is shaped by decisions? Sometimes those decisions involve warships and politics. Other times, they involve not pulling the trigger. Let's meet the 2 men most responsible for the pig war not becoming an actual war. First, Captain George Pickett. American, charismatic, ambitious, and very into saber-rattling. Pickett wanted to be remembered. He was ready to fight. But history had other plans. He eventually became more famous for something else, a disastrous charge at the Battle of Gettysburg. But that's another video. Now, let's talk about the other key figure, Governor James Douglas. British, calculating, calm, born in British Guiana, a multilingual fur trader turned imperial administrator. Douglas wanted to prove Britain was still the boss in North America, but he didn't want to start a war that could lose Canada. So when the situation got spicy, it was Douglas who called in the Navy. And it was the Royal Navy's Admiral Baines who refused to fire. Seriously, give it up for the guy who looked at 3 warships, 2,000 men, and a saber-happy captain, and said, "This is not worth it." Chapter 13. The Joint Occupation A 12-year roommate agreement after the standoff cooled. Both governments agreed, let's just share the island until we figure it out. And so began a 12-year joint military occupation. It was weirdly wholesome. Every Sunday, soldiers from both sides visited each other's camps. They played music, danced, swapped coffee and tobacco. They even attended weddings together. It was less war zone and more neighborhood barbecue. There was even a Christmas where the two sides hosted a joint holiday dinner. Imagine, soldiers who were supposed to be enemies. Roasting turkeys, swapping stories, toasting each other with spiked eggnog. And it wasn't just about friendship. This Cold Not War was also a message to the world. We can be rivals without being reckless. Chapter 14. Meanwhile, back in the halls of power. While things were peaceful on San Juan Island. The diplomatic tension? Not so much. In London, officials worried the Americans might use San Juan as a foothold to grab more of British Columbia. In Washington, U.S. leaders worried Britain would use Canada to squeeze out American settlers. And then there was Germany. By 1871, the world had changed. Germany had become a newly unified empire. Kaiser Wilhelm I was seen as a neutral, modernizing power. So both Britain and the U.S. turned to the Kaiser and said, "Can anyone settle this pig issue for us?" Wilhelm agreed and appointed a 3-person arbitration commission. They reviewed maps, testimonies, captain logs, pig receipts seriously, and in the end, they chose the American interpretation of the border through the Harrow Strait. On October 21st, 1872, the British officially withdrew. No bloodshed, no invasion, just handshakes and history. Chapter 15. What if the pig war had gone hot? Let's play a game of what if. What if Admiral Baines had fired those cannons? What if Pickett had charged the beach? A war in 1859 would have been brutal. The U.S. was less than 2 years away from the Civil War. The British Empire controlled Canada and had naval superiority, and the Pacific Northwest was still developing. A real war might have. Delayed or altered U.S. westward expansion sparked a second 1812-style war, rewritten Canadian borders entirely, or worst of all, started a long, bloody feud that poisoned U.S.-British relations for decades. All that over one pig. Chapter 16. The island that almost made history and then chose not to. San Juan Island. Quiet, idyllic, known for whale watching, kayaking, and a war that never really happened. It's not just a quirky footnote. It's a living museum of what can happen when people decide not to blow each other up. Chapter 17. The camps become parks today. Both the American camp and the British camp are preserved as national historical parks. They're part of the U.S. National Park Service, and they tell a story of how even potential enemies can choose respect over retaliation. You can still walk the fields where troops stood ready. You can see reconstructed barracks, historic cannons, and interpretive signs explaining why everything didn't go up in flames. There's even an annual reenactment where volunteers portray both British and American soldiers, complete with campfire songs, musket drills, and tea service. Chapter 18. Commemorating the pig. Yes, really, and yes, the pig has its moment too. There's no grave, no preserved hide, but there is a monument. A memorial stone near the old Hudson's Bay Company farm marks the site where it all began. The inscription? In memory of the pig whose death led to peace. It's not often that an animal sparks a diplomatic incident, and it's even rarer when that incident ends without a single human casualty. Chapter 19. The legacy. How not fighting changed everything. So what does the pig war actually teach us? It sounds like a joke, but it's not. At a time when the US and Britain could have fought, like they had before, they didn't. They talked. They shared. They drank tea together. And they showed the world something important. You don't always need a winner and a loser. Sometimes, peace is the power move. This moment shaped US, British relations for the better. The two countries went on to become close allies in world wars, in diplomacy, in trade, and yes, in memes.